Victoria Hale slammed her palm flat against the polished boardroom table and pointed straight at the door. "You're finished. Pack up your things and get out of my building." The man she'd just fired didn't argue. He didn't beg. He simply nodded, whispered, "Thank you," and walked away with one arm pressed hard against his ribs like he was holding his own body together. Victoria believed she'd protected her company's standards that morning. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that 47 minutes earlier, that same quiet man had thrown himself in front of a moving car to save a 9-year-old girl. And that little girl was her own daughter. Before we begin, do me a favor. Drop a comment and tell me which city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels across America. And if stories about second chances and quiet heroes still mean something to you, subscribe and stay with me all the way to the end. Because you will not believe how this one finishes. The rain came down over Seattle in long gray sheets that Monday morning, drumming against the 40-story glass tower that bore the name Hale Innovations in brushed steel letters. Inside on the top floor, Victoria Hale stood at the head of a boardroom table long enough to seat 20 people, and she was already angry. It was 8:04 in the morning, and one chair was empty. "Where is he?" she said, not to anyone in particular. Her assistant, a nervous young man named Preston, who had learned in his first week never to give Victoria an answer he wasn't sure of, cleared his throat. "Who, ma'am?" "You know who." Victoria didn't look up from the tablet in her hand. "The maintenance chair. The East Wing supervisor is supposed to give the safety report this morning. He signs off before the auditors come in on Thursday. Where is he?" Preston tapped his own screen. "Daniel Brooks, ma'am. He's not clocked in yet." The room went a little quieter. There were 9 other people at that table, all department heads, all of them earning 6 figures, all of them watching their CEO, the way men watch storm clouds gather over water. They had learned that Victoria Hale's silence was more dangerous than her voice. Victoria set the tablet down. She was 34 years old, and she had built this company from a rented office with 2 employees into something worth just under $1 billion. She had done it by believing one thing with the certainty of scripture rules exist for everyone, and the moment you make exceptions, the whole structure begins to rot from the inside. "Let me tell you all something," Victoria said, and her voice was calm, which frightened them more than shouting would have. "I have been in this chair since 6:15 this morning. I drove through this rain. My accountant, who is 61 years old and had a knee replaced 8 weeks ago, is sitting right there." She nodded at a gray-haired man near the end of the table. "Harold made it. Harold made it on a fake knee in the rain on time. So I want someone to explain to me why a man whose entire job is being reliable cannot be reliable enough to walk through a door." Nobody answered. "Marcus," she said, turning to her operations director. "You hired him. Tell me about him." Marcus Bell shifted in his seat. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, a former college linebacker who had gone soft in the middle around 50. He liked Daniel Brooks. Everyone did. "Victoria, in fairness, Daniel's the best I've got. 2 years never late once, not once. If he's not here, there's a reason." "Then where's the phone call?" Victoria said. Marcus opened his mouth and closed it again. "That's what I thought," she said, "because that's the part that bothers me. A man is late, fine. People are late. Life happens. But a man who is late and doesn't call, that's not a bad morning. That's a decision. That's a man who has decided somewhere in the back of his mind that my meeting is not important enough to warrant a text message." She let that settle over the room. "And I built this company on the principle that everyone's time matters. Mine, yours, the janitor's, the kid in the mailrooms. We respect the clock, or we don't respect each other." Harold, the old accountant, spoke up gently. He was the only one in the room who could speak to Victoria that way, because he'd been with her since the beginning, since the rented office, since the day she couldn't make payroll, and cried in her car so no one would see. "Vic," he said, using the name only he was allowed to use, "you don't know that he decided anything. You're building a whole man out of one empty chair." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "Then let's fill the chair," she said. "We start the meeting, and when Mr. Brooks decides to grace us with his presence, We'll find out what was more important than the rest of us. They ran the meeting, quarterly projections, a contract in Denver that was 3 weeks behind, a hiring freeze in the marketing division. Victoria was sharp, precise, and cold in the way a scalpel is cold. She cut cleanly and moved on. But part of her mind kept drifting back to that empty chair, and every time it did, the anger climbed a little higher in her chest like water rising behind a dam. It wasn't really about the safety report. She knew that somewhere underneath, even if she wouldn't admit it, it was about the fact that her father had been the kind of man who was always 45 minutes late and always had an excuse. A man who missed her school plays and her graduation, and the day she opened her first office. A man who had taught her that the people who love you the most will still let you down if you give them the chance. Victoria Hale had spent her whole life making sure she never gave anyone that chance again. She controlled every variable. She showed up. She was never ever late. At 8:37, the boardroom door opened. Daniel Brooks stepped inside, and the whole room turned to look at him. He was 38 years old, lean and quiet, with the kind of weathered, honest face that made strangers trust him without knowing why. But that morning, something was wrong with him, and everyone at the table saw it at the same time. His work shirt was dirty, not the ordinary dirt of a maintenance man, but streaked with something dark across the front, torn at the shoulder. His face was pale and drawn sweat standing on his forehead, even though the building was cool. And his right arm was pressed tight against his side, held there deliberately, the way a man holds an arm when the ribs underneath it are broken, and every breath is a small negotiation with pain. Marcus half rose from his chair. "Daniel Jesus, are you?" "Sit down, Marcus," Victoria said quietly. Marcus sat down. Victoria studied the man in the doorway. And here is the thing she would replay in her mind for months afterward. The thing that would keep her awake at 3 in the morning. She saw everything. She saw the torn shirt. She saw the arm. She saw the pallor and the sweat, and the way he was standing careful like a man who had been hurt. She saw all of it. And she read it wrong. Because Victoria Hale had spent her whole life learning to read people fast, and reading people fast is not the same as reading them right. She looked at a disheveled man arriving 37 minutes late, and her mind, trained by a lifetime of disappointment, supplied the story it had been supplying since she was a little girl, waiting on a porch for a father who wasn't coming. He'd been out drinking, or he'd been in some kind of trouble, or he'd gotten into it with somebody. Something reckless, something selfish, something that was his own fault. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "you're late." "Yes, ma'am." His voice was steady but thin, like he was rationing it. "I am. I'm sorry. You were supposed to present the East Wing Safety Compliance Report at 8 o'clock this morning. The auditors are here Thursday. Do you understand what happens to this company if that report isn't ready?" "I do, ma'am. It's finished. It's on the shared drive. I sent it Friday night." Daniel drew a breath, and Victoria watched him wince as his ribs moved. "You don't need me to present it. Marcus can walk you through it. It's all there." That should have stopped her. If she had been listening, really listening, the fact that he'd finished the report 3 days early on a Friday night on his own time should have told her everything she needed to know about the kind of man Daniel Brooks was. But Victoria was not listening. She was performing for a room full of executives the lesson she believed they all needed to learn. "That's not the point," she said. "No, ma'am. I don't suppose it is." Something in the way he said it, so quiet, so tired, so utterly without fight, made Marcus try again. "Victoria," Marcus said low. "Look at him. Something happened to this man. Let him sit down. Let him tell us." "Marcus!" Victoria's voice cracked across the room like a rifle shot. "One more word." The room froze. She turned back to Daniel. "You want to tell me what happened? You want to explain the shirt, the arm, the reason you're standing in my boardroom looking like you crawled here through a ditch? Go ahead. I'm listening. Tell me your story." And this was the moment. This was the crossroads where everything might have turned out differently, where a single sentence from Daniel Brooks, "A man tried to take a child, and I stopped him," would have changed the entire morning, would have made Victoria Hale go pale, would have made her rush to him instead of away from him. But Daniel didn't say it. Because Daniel Brooks did not talk about the things he did. He never had. When he'd pulled families out of collapsed buildings, he hadn't talked about it. When he'd carried a stranger down 11 flights of a burning stairwell, he hadn't talked about it. He had buried his wife 2 years earlier, and he had not talked about that either. Not to anyone, because Daniel had learned a long time ago that the world does not reward the men who bleed quietly. It rewards the men who make noise. And he had made his peace with being the other kind. More than that, standing in that doorway, dizzy and in pain, with something dark and cold spreading behind his eyes, all Daniel Brooks could think about was his daughter, Lily, 7 years old. The reason he got out of bed every morning. The reason he had walked away from a career that paid 3 times what this one did, because that career had a way of sending men home in boxes, and Lily had already lost one parent. Daniel could not lose this job. He could not. Without this job, there was no health insurance, there was no rent, there was no roof over that little girl's head. He had already told the school he might be late picking her up. He had already on the drive across the city, with his ribs screaming, done the math 100 times. If he explained, if he made a scene, if he became a problem, he might get sympathy today and get let go quietly in a month. But if he just took it whatever came, if he just kept his head down and did his work, maybe he'd keep the job. Maybe Lily would be okay. So when Victoria Hale said, "Tell me your story," Daniel Brooks looked at the floor and made the only decision his heart would let him make. "You're right, Ms. Hale," he said. "I should have called. There's no excuse for that. I'm sorry." Victoria blinked. She had been braced for a fight. She was always braced for a fight. She had a whole arsenal ready, the questions, the interruptions, the way she could take a man's excuse apart piece by piece, until he was standing there with nothing. She had expected him to blame the traffic, the rain, his car, his kid, anything. She had expected the thing her father always did, the long, winding, self-pitying story that ended with "so. Really, when you think about it, it's not my fault." Instead, Daniel Brooks had done the one thing she had no defense against. He had simply agreed with her. And God help her, that made it worse. Because a man who fights is a man you can beat. But a man who lowers his head and takes the blame without a word of complaint, there's something about that a certain kind of proud person cannot stand. It doesn't look like humility to them. It looks like a trap. It looks like manipulation. It looks like a man trying to make you feel guilty for holding him accountable. He's playing the martyr, the cold voice in the back of Victoria's mind said. Look at him. Standing there all wounded and noble. He wants you to feel sorry for him. He wants the whole room to feel sorry for him. Don't you dare fall for it. You should have called, Victoria said. Yes, ma'am. Do you know how many people in this room rearranged their morning to be here on time? Do you understand that when you don't show up, when you don't even have the basic decency to send a 2-word text, you are telling every single person at this table that their time is worth less than yours? That wasn't my intention. I don't care about your intention. And now her voice was rising, and she hated that it was rising because she prided herself on never losing control, and this quiet, ruined man was somehow pulling it out of her anyway. I care about the pattern. I care about what happens to this company the day everyone decides they can show up whenever they feel like it, because Daniel Brooks did, and nothing happened to him. Do you understand? I do. Harold, the old accountant, was staring at Victoria now with something on his face that she didn't want to see. It wasn't disagreement. It was worse. It was disappointment. He'd looked at her like that exactly once before years ago, when she'd made a young single mother cry over a scheduling error, and Victoria had never forgotten it, and she couldn't bear to see it again now. So she did what proud people do when someone they respect is watching them go too far. She went further. Here's what I've decided, Victoria said, and she heard her own voice come out flat and final. The boardroom voice. The billion-dollar voice. The voice that had never once been wrong in front of an audience. I've thought about it, and I'm not going to write you up. A write-up is for people I expect to correct their behavior. I don't think you're going to correct anything. I think this is who you are." Marcus made a sound low in his throat, a wounded, disbelieving sound. "Victoria, don't. Daniel Brooks," she said, "your employment with Hale Innovations is terminated. Effective immediately." The words hung in the air. Rain drummed on the glass. Somewhere down in the building, an elevator chimed, and Daniel Brooks, standing in the doorway with 3 broken ribs and a child's blood still faintly staining the front of his shirt, did not fall to his knees. He did not shout. He did not tell her what she could do with her job, though God knows he would have been within his rights. He simply nodded one slow time, as though he had expected nothing better from the world, and the world had once again met his expectations. "I understand," he said. "Thank you for the 2 years. Thank you." He said thank you. Later, that would be the part Victoria couldn't get out of her head. Not the firing, the thank you. The man she had just destroyed standing there thanking her and meaning it. "Preston will process your final paperwork," Victoria said, and she was already looking down at her tablet, already moving on, already performing the busy indifference of a woman who fires people before breakfast and doesn't lose a wink of sleep. "Collect your things. Marcus will escort you out." "That won't be necessary," Daniel said quietly. "I don't have much, and I'm not going to steal anything on my way out." The dignity in it was almost unbearable. Marcus stood up anyway, not to guard him, but to be near him, and put a hand very gently on Daniel's uninjured shoulder. And Daniel flinched anyway, because even that side of him hurt. "Daniel," Marcus said, and his voice was breaking. "This huge former linebacker, brother. Whatever happened, let me take you to a hospital. You don't look right." "I'm fine, Marcus." Daniel tried to smile, and it was the saddest thing in the room. "I've had worse. Let me at least take care of your people, Marcus." Daniel looked for one moment at the whole table, at Harold, who couldn't meet his eyes, at the department heads staring at their laptops, and finally briefly at Victoria, who was pretending to read. "You've got good people here. They deserve good leadership." And then Daniel Brooks turned and walked out of the boardroom, one arm pressed to his side, and the door swung shut behind him with a soft, expensive click. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Victoria looked up bright and businesslike, as if nothing at all had happened. "All right," she said. "Where were we, Harold? The Denver numbers." But Harold didn't reach for the Denver numbers. Harold, 61 years old, took off his glasses and set them on the table and rubbed his eyes with a thumb and forefinger, and when he spoke very quietly, and everyone heard him. "That was wrong, Vic." "Excuse me. You heard me." He put his glasses back on. "I've stood beside you for 11 years. I watched you build this from nothing. I watched you make 1,000 hard calls, and most of them were right, and the ones that weren't, you owned. But that—" He nodded toward the door. "That was just cruel. That man was hurt. Anybody with 2 eyes could see he was hurt. And you fired him for it because you decided before he ever walked in that door what kind of man he was. He didn't call Harold. I don't care if he didn't call." And now the old man's voice shook, and that shook everyone, because Harold never raised his voice. "You want to talk about respect for people's time? What about respect for people, period? That man gave you 2 years without a single complaint. He earned one question. One, Daniel, are you okay? That's all it would have taken. One human question. And you couldn't give it to him because you were too busy teaching the rest of us a lesson." Victoria's jaw tightened. "Are you finished?" "No," Harold said. "But I expect you'll tell me when I am." They stared at each other across the table, the CEO and the old accountant, and the whole room held its breath, because this was the closest anyone had ever come to open war with Victoria Hale, and lived to sit back down. And Victoria, who was right, who was always right, who had built an empire on being right, felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Doubt. It was small. It was quick. It slid through her like a draft through a crack in a window. For just a second, she saw the morning through Harold's eyes, the pale man, the torn shirt, the pressed arm, the finished report he'd sent on a Friday night, the thank you for the 2 years. And a small, cold voice she usually kept locked away whispered, "What if you're wrong?" She crushed it. She crushed it the way she'd crushed every doubt for 20 years, because doubt was a luxury for people who could afford to be soft, and Victoria Hale had never once been able to afford it. "He didn't call Harold," she said again quietly. And this time it sounded less like a verdict and more like a woman trying to convince herself. "That's the whole thing. He didn't call." Harold looked at her for a long moment. "One day," he said softly, "you're going to find out why he didn't call. And I hope to God you're sitting down when you do." Victoria did not answer him. She looked back down at her tablet, and she said in a voice that had gone strangely hollow, "Let's take 15 minutes. Everybody out. Harold, get me the Denver file." The department heads filed out fast, grateful to escape murmuring nothing to each other in the way people murmur nothing after they've watched something ugly happen and don't want to be caught having an opinion about it. Marcus was the last to leave, and he stopped in the doorway and looked back at Victoria, and he didn't say anything, but the look said everything. Then he was gone too, hurrying, and she suspected correctly that he was going down to the parking garage to try to catch Daniel before he drove away to slip him a business card, a phone number, $100. Anything. The way decent men try to soften the cruelty of the systems they work inside. And Victoria Hale was alone in her boardroom. She stood at the great glass wall and looked out at the rain falling over Seattle, over the gray water of the Sound, over the ferries crawling back and forth like patient beetles. And she told herself that she had done the right thing. She told herself that this was leadership, that leadership meant making the hard call, the unpopular call, the call that everyone hated in the moment and thanked you for later. She told herself that a company was a machine, and a machine could not run if any single part decided the rules didn't apply to it. She told herself all of it, the whole catechism she had built her life around, and for the most part, she believed it. But underneath the belief in the place where the small, cold voice lived, something would not lie still. Thank you for the 2 years. Who says that? Who gets fired, humiliated, thrown out into the rain, and turns at the door to say thank you? Not a lazy man, not a selfish man, not the kind of man her mind had built out of a torn shirt and an empty chair. A different kind of man entirely said that. A kind of man she had known once a long time ago, before the world taught her to stop trusting people. A man who was carrying something. She turned from the window. On the far end of the boardroom table sat the tablet, where Daniel's safety report waited on the shared drive. On an impulse she didn't examine too closely, Victoria walked down the long table and opened it and looked at the file. It was flawless. It was more than flawless. It was the most thorough compliance report she had ever seen come out of that department, cross-referenced, annotated with a 2-page appendix on emergency evacuation improvements that no one had asked him to write. At the bottom of that appendix, in a small note, Daniel had written, "If we ever have a real emergency in this building, these are the 7 things that will save lives. I've flagged them in red. Please don't let the budget cut the red ones. DB." Victoria stared at that note for a long time. Then she closed the tablet, and she told herself it didn't mean anything. And she went to find Harold and the Denver file because she had a company to run, and she could not afford. She could never afford to spend her morning feeling things. She had no way of knowing that down in the parking garage at that exact moment, Marcus Bell had caught up to Daniel just as he was easing himself into the front seat of a 15-year-old pickup truck, breathing in short, careful sips because of his ribs. She had no way of knowing that Marcus had grabbed the door and said, "Daniel, please tell me what happened to you." And she had no way of knowing that Daniel Brooks had looked up at his old friend with eyes full of a bone-deep, ancient exhaustion, and had almost told him, had opened his mouth to say the words, and then had shaken his head and said only, "Doesn't matter now, Marcus. It's done. Take care of yourself." And she had no way of knowing, not yet, that in 11 minutes, her phone was going to ring. That the number on the screen would be her daughter's school. That a voice she had never heard before, tight and shaking, was going to say the 6 words that would take the floor out from under her. "Ms. Hale, there's been an incident." that the world she had spent 34 years building into something orderly and controlled and safe was about to crack straight down the middle. But all of that was still 11 minutes away. For now, Victoria Hale stood in her boardroom on the top floor of her tower, certain of herself, certain of her judgment, certain that rules exist for everyone, and that she had just protected the thing she'd built. She had never in her life been more wrong about anything. And somewhere across the gray, rain-soaked city, a quiet man with 3 broken ribs and a child's dried blood on his shirt was driving home to hold his own little girl, having told no one what he'd done, expecting nothing, asking for nothing. Already trying to figure out how he was going to pay next month's rent, now that the only steady thing in his life was gone. He didn't feel like a hero. He never did. He just felt tired, and he felt his ribs, and he felt the deep familiar ache of a man who has learned that doing the right thing and being rewarded for it are 2 entirely different roads that almost never cross. He was wrong about that. He just didn't know it yet. The Denver file was open on the boardroom table, and Harold was halfway through the second quarter's numbers when Victoria's phone rang. She almost didn't answer it. She had a rule about that: the meeting is the meeting, the phone can wait, and she'd built half her reputation on being the kind of leader who didn't glance at a screen while a person was talking to her. So her hand went to silence it without looking the way it had 1,000 times. Then she saw the name on the screen. Maplewood Elementary. Harold, hold on. Vic, we've got the auditors Thursday, we can't. It's Sophie's school. She was already standing. Give me a second. She swiped and put the phone to her ear and said in the crisp, unbothered voice of a woman who receives 40 phone calls a day, "This is Victoria Hale." There was a pause on the other end. A breath. And in that breath, before a single word was spoken, some animal part of Victoria's brain that had nothing to do with billion-dollar decisions came awake and went cold, because you don't work at a school and pause like that before you talk to a parent unless something is wrong. "Ms. Hale!" A woman's voice tight over-controlled the voice of someone reading from a script they'd been handed in the last 5 minutes because nobody else could keep their hands from shaking. "This is Diane Foster. I'm the principal at Maplewood. I need you to first. I want you to know that Sophie is safe. Sophie is okay. I'm going to say that again because I know how phone calls like this feel. Your daughter is safe, and she is not hurt." Victoria's legs did a strange thing. They went distant like they belonged to someone standing near her. "What happened?" she said. It didn't come out as a question. It came out flat because her whole body had gone very still, the way the surface of water goes still right before something enormous rises up underneath it. "There was an incident this morning. In the parking lot, during early drop-off." The principal's voice cracked once just slightly and reassembled itself. A man, an adult male, not a parent, not connected to the school, approached Sophie near the east gate. He tried to Ms. Hale. He attempted to take her. He tried to force her into a vehicle. The boardroom tilted. Victoria's free hand found the edge of the table and held it. "Say that again," she whispered. "A man tried to abduct your daughter this morning." Harold was on his feet now. He didn't know what he was hearing, but he could see Victoria's face, and Victoria's face had gone the color of the rain outside the glass, and he came around the table fast for a man of 61. "She's safe," the principal was saying faster now, tumbling the words out, because she could hear the silence on the other end, and silence from a parent is the most frightening sound in the world. "Ms. Hale, she is completely safe. She's sitting in my office right now with a blanket and a juice box. She doesn't have a scratch on her. Do you hear me?" Somebody stopped it. Somebody stopped him. A man was there in the lot, and he saw it happening, and he... "Who?" Victoria said. "Well, he intervened. He got between Sophie and the... Who was it?" "We don't know, ma'am. That's part of why I'm calling. He didn't leave a name. He wouldn't stay. Whoever he was, he Ms. Hale. From what the parents in the lot are saying, he put himself directly in front of the vehicle. He took Sophie, and he got her behind him. And the man in the car actually struck him, we think. And he still didn't let go of her. He held on to her until the car drove off. And then he made sure she was okay, and he was talking to the other parents, keeping everyone calm. And then somebody said, he looked at his watch, and he got a look on his face, and he told one of the moms he had to go, he couldn't be late, and he got in an old truck, and he left before the police arrived. The phone was very heavy in Victoria's hand. He looked at his watch, she heard herself repeat. Ma'am. You said he looked at his watch. And he said he couldn't be late. Yes, ma'am. The mother who was closest to him. Mrs. Alvarez, she said he seemed like he was in a lot of pain. Actually, she wanted him to sit down. She thought he was hurt, but he kept saying he was fine and he couldn't be late for work. He apologized. He apologized to her. Ms. Hale, right after saving your daughter's life, he apologized because he had to leave. Somewhere very far down inside Victoria Hale, a door that had been shut for a long time began slowly to open, and behind it was a darkness she did not want to look into. Ms. Hale, are you there? I'm on my way, Victoria said. I'm on my way right now. She hung up. Or she thought she hung up. Later, she wouldn't remember pressing anything. She just remembered that Harold was gripping her by both shoulders and saying her name. Vic, what is it? Talk to me. And she remembered that her mouth wasn't working right. And she remembered that when she finally got the words out, they came in the wrong order. Somebody tried to take Sophie, she said. A man tried to take my daughter. This morning. At school. Oh my God. Somebody stopped him. And here, Victoria's voice did something it hadn't done in front of another human being in over a decade. It broke cleanly in half. A man stopped him, Harold. A man got between them. He took the hit. He got hit by the car, and he still didn't let go of her. Thank God, Harold breathed. Thank God for that man, whoever... And that was the moment. That was the exact moment the darkness behind the opening door showed Victoria its face. He looked at his watch. He said he couldn't be late for work. He was hurt, but he wouldn't stay. He apologized and got in an old truck and drove away. An old truck. A man in pain, holding one side of himself. A man who said he couldn't be late. A man who had in fact been late 37 minutes late, and had walked into a boardroom with a torn shirt and a pressed arm, and a dark stain across the front of his shirt that Victoria had assumed was dirt. She had assumed it was dirt. Victoria Hale stopped breathing. No, she said. Vic, no, no, no. No. She was backing away from Harold now, backing into the great glass wall, shaking her head like she could physically fling the thought out of it. No, it's not. It can't be Harold. Victoria? You're scaring me. What is it? What time? She said. Her voice had gone to a whisper again, but it was a different kind of whisper now. The whisper of a woman standing at the edge of something. The school. What time is drop-off? Early drop-off. What time? I don't know. 7:38. Maplewood is across the city. It's east side. It's a 40-minute drive from here in the rain. She was doing the math now out loud, and every number landed like a stone. If it happened at early drop-off, 7:47:45, and he stayed until she was calm, and then he drove all the way across the city in the rain. Harold went very still. He was an accountant. He had spent his whole life watching numbers line up into a truth whether you wanted them to or not. And he watched these numbers line up now, and he watched the truth of them break across Victoria's face, and something old and sick turned over in his own stomach. Vic, he said carefully, what time did Daniel Brooks walk into this room? Victoria closed her eyes. 8:37, she said. The rain came down over Seattle. Neither of them said anything for what felt like a very long time. His shirt, Victoria said finally, and her voice had gone hollow, scraped out the voice of someone speaking from the bottom of a well. There was something dark on his shirt, on the front. I thought I looked right at it, Harold, and I thought it was dirt. I thought he'd been rolling around in a ditch. I thought he'd been out doing something reckless. I fired him for it. I stood right there, and I fired him for it. And I made him say thank you on his way out the door. You didn't know. His arm. She wasn't listening. She was somewhere else now, back in the doorway of the boardroom an hour ago, seeing it all again, seeing it correctly for the first time. He was holding his arm against his side, like this. She pressed her own arm against her ribs, mimicking it, and her face crumpled. Like it was broken. Because it was broken. Because a car hit him. Harold. A car hit him because he was standing between it and my daughter, and then he drove across the whole city with his ribs broken so he wouldn't lose his job, and he walked into my boardroom, and I looked at him and I decided before he even spoke that he was a bad man, that he was lazy, that he didn't respect anybody's time. Her voice climbed and cracked. I said that to him. I said you don't respect anybody's time. To the man who had just, Vic, sit down. I have to go. You need to sit down for 1 second. I have to go now, Harold. She was already moving, already grabbing her coat off the back of the chair, and her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't get her arm into the sleeve. I have to see her. I have to see Sophie. And then I have to, oh God, what did I do? What did I do to that man? Harold caught her at the door. 61 years old, bad knee and all. He put himself between Victoria Hale and the exit, and he took her by both arms again, and he made her look at him. Listen to me, he said. Right now, none of that matters. Not the meeting, not the auditors, not Daniel, not what you did or didn't know. Right now, there is exactly one thing in the entire world, and it is a little girl in a principal's office holding a juice box, and she needs her mother. So you are going to get in your car, and you are going to drive across this city, and you are going to hold your daughter. That's it. That is the only thing. Everything else we'll deal with. You hear me? Everything else we will deal with. Go get your girl. Victoria looked at the old man, and for 1 second, she was not a CEO. She was not a billion-dollar decision-maker. She was just a terrified mother whose child had almost been taken from the face of the earth an hour ago, while she stood in a room firing the man who saved her. I fired him, Harold, she whispered. Go get your girl, Harold said again softly. The rest comes after. She went. She didn't remember the elevator. She didn't remember the lobby or the parking garage or getting into her car. The first thing she remembered clearly was the rain hammering the windshield on the freeway, and her own knuckles white on the wheel, and the wipers going back and forth, and her own voice small and cracked, saying the same 2 words over and over into the empty car, like a woman praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. Please, 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 please. She wasn't even sure what she was asking for. That Sophie would be okay, but the principal had said Sophie was okay. That it wasn't Daniel, but she already knew it was Daniel. Maybe she was just saying, please, because when the bottom drops out of your whole ordered world, please is the only word left that's the right size for the terror. Traffic on the east side exit was backed up because of the rain, and she nearly climbed out of her skin. She caught herself pounding the wheel, caught herself screaming at a minivan that had done nothing wrong, and she made herself stop, made herself breathe because Harold's voice was in her head. There is exactly one thing in the entire world, and she could not walk into that principal's office looking like a woman coming apart because Sophie needed her steady. Sophie needed her whole. So Victoria Hale, who had spent her entire life being whole through sheer force of will, called on that will one more time, and she pushed the terror down into her chest and locked it there, and she drove. Maplewood Elementary sat behind a low brick wall with a wet flag hanging limp in the rain. There were 2 police cars in the lot, lights off but present, and a knot of parents standing under the overhang by the front doors, talking in the low, urgent, huddled way that people talk after something has almost gone very wrong. Victoria parked badly half over a line and left the engine running, and she was out of the car and across the lot before she'd consciously decided to move. A young police officer put out a hand. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to. My daughter is in there. Sophie Hale. I'm her mother. The officer's whole posture changed. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. Principal Foster's office straight in second door on the... Victoria was already past him. The front doors, a hallway that smelled like every elementary school in America, crayon and floor wax, and something faintly like graham crackers, and then a glass door marked office. And Victoria hit it with the flat of her hand, and it swung open, And there on a small plastic chair that was too big for her, wrapped in a scratchy gray blanket with a juice box in both small hands, was Sophie. Mommy? And Victoria Hale, CEO, billion-dollar decision-maker, terror of every boardroom on the West Coast, dropped to her knees on the linoleum floor of an elementary school office and pulled her 9-year-old daughter into her arms and made a sound she had never made before in her life. "I've got you," she was saying over and over into Sophie's hair. "I've got you, baby. I've got you. I've got you. Mommy's here. I've got you." "Mommy, you're squishing me." A laugh tore out of Victoria that was half a sob. She pulled back just enough to hold her daughter's face in both hands to look at her, to catalog every inch of her. The eyes, the nose, the 2 front teeth still growing and crooked, the little scar on the chin from the bicycle last summer. All of it still here, still whole. "Let me look at you. Are you hurt? Does anything hurt? Tell me the truth." "I'm okay. Miss Foster gave me apple juice." Sophie held up the box as evidence. Then her small face did something complicated, something too old for 9, and her voice went smaller. "Mommy, a man tried to take me." "I know, baby. He grabbed my backpack, and he was pulling me, and he had a car with the door open, and I was scared." The words were coming faster now, the way they do when a child has been holding them in, and an adult they trust finally arrives to hold them. "I was really scared, and I couldn't get away, and he was really strong, and then there was another man, and the other man came really fast, and he yelled, and he grabbed me, and he put me behind him." Victoria couldn't speak. She just held on. And the bad man's car started moving, and the nice man didn't move Mommy. He didn't move out of the way. He just stayed in front of me. And the car bumped him really hard, and he made a sound like... Sophie's lip trembled, like it hurt really bad. But he still held on to me. He wouldn't let go even when he got hurt. He kept his arm around me the whole time so I couldn't see the car. Oh, sweetheart. And then the bad man drove away and everybody was yelling, and the nice man got down on his knees so he was the same size as me, and he held both my hands and he said... Sophie screwed up her face, working to get it exactly right, because it had clearly mattered to her that she remember it exactly right. He said, "You're safe now. You did everything right. You're a brave girl, and you're safe, and nobody's going to hurt you." And he asked me my name, and I told him Sophie, and he said that was a good name. And he asked if I had a mom or a dad he could call, and I said my mommy works far away. And he said that was okay, the school would call you, and I should go with Miss Foster and wait for you inside where it's warm. Victoria's vision had gone completely underwater. And then he had to go, Sophie said. And there was a strange, grave sadness in her 9-year-old voice, the sadness of a child who has understood something the adults around her maybe haven't. He was holding his side like this. She pressed her small arm against her ribs, and Victoria made a sound. And Mrs. Alvarez said he should sit down and wait for the doctors, but he said he couldn't. He had to go to work. He was already late, and he might get in trouble. And he said sorry. He said sorry like 4 times. And then he walked to his truck really slow, like it hurt to walk, and he drove away. Sophie looked up at her mother. "Do you think he's okay, Mommy? He got hit really hard. I don't want him to not be okay. He was nice." For a moment, Victoria couldn't answer, because to answer, she would have to open her mouth. And if she opened her mouth, she was going to tell her 9-year-old daughter the truth. Which was, the nice man is not okay. And it's my fault, because after he saved your life, he drove to my building with his ribs broken, and I fired him. She swallowed it. "I think he's very brave," Victoria said instead, and her voice only shook a little. "I think he's the bravest person I ever heard of, and we are going to make sure he's okay. I promise you that. We are going to find him, and we are going to make sure he's okay. Do you promise? Promise?" "I promise, promise." Principal Foster had been standing back near her desk this whole time, giving them their moment. But now she stepped forward quietly, and there was something in her hand. "Ms. Hale, when you're ready. The parking lot has a security camera. It caught most of it. The officers have already seen it, but I thought..." She hesitated. "I thought you might want to see it too. To understand what happened to your daughter, and what that man did. But I'll be honest with you, it's hard to watch, even knowing how it ends. Victoria stood up slowly, keeping one hand on Sophie's shoulder, unwilling to break contact. "Show me," she said. "Sophie, honey," the principal said gently, "why don't you come sit with Miss Karen at the front desk and finish your juice?" Miss Karen has stickers. The really good ones, the fuzzy ones. Sophie, who was 9, and had been through something no child should go through, and was in the way of children already, partly on the other side of it, allowed herself to be led away by the promise of fuzzy stickers. And Victoria watched her go. And then Principal Foster turned a computer monitor around on the desk and clicked something. And the video began to play. Victoria had steeled herself. She thought she was ready. She was not ready. The footage was grainy and gray, the color washed out by the rain, the timestamp ticking in the corner. 7:44 a.m. There was the east gate, the low brick wall, a scatter of parents and kids under umbrellas. There was Sophie, tiny in her yellow raincoat, walking toward the gate with her backpack the way she did every morning, the way she had done 100 mornings while Victoria was already at the office, while Victoria was doing something important, something that had seemed important. And there, coming into the frame from the right, was a man. He moved fast and wrong. He moved the way predators move, all false casual, right up until he wasn't. And Victoria watched him close the distance to her daughter, and she watched her own hand come up over her mouth. He grabbed the backpack first. Sophie stumbled. He grabbed her arm. A car pulled up hard against the curb, a dark sedan, the passenger door already swinging open. Sophie's little legs were scrambling, her mouth open in a scream the silent footage couldn't carry, and the man was dragging her toward the open door. And it was happening so fast, it was happening in seconds. It was the kind of thing that Victoria had read about in the news and thought, how does that happen so fast? Why doesn't somebody? And then somebody did. He came in from the far left of the frame at a dead run, even on grainy footage. Even washed gray by the rain, Victoria knew the shape of him before she could see his face. She knew the way he moved. She had watched him walk out of her boardroom an hour ago, and now she watched him run, and there was nothing careful about it, nothing self-protective, nothing that hesitated even for a fraction of a second to calculate the cost. He just ran flat out straight at a moving car, and a grown man with no weapon and no plan, and no thought for himself at all. "Oh, Daniel," Victoria whispered. He hit them like weather. He got a hand on Sophie, and he tore her out of the man's grip, and in the same motion, he spun his own body around and put her behind him, put himself between the child and the car. And Victoria watched the abductor scramble back into the sedan, and she watched the sedan lurch forward, not away but forward at Daniel, at both of them, either to run them down or to panic its way out of the lot. And she watched Daniel Brooks plant his feet and not move. He did not move. There was a child behind him and a car coming at him, and every instinct a body has screams move, and Daniel Brooks stood there like a wall. And the car struck him, and Victoria watched the impact throw his whole body sideways. And she watched him get one arm back around Sophie even as he was being hit, dragging her with him, curling his body around hers, so that when they both went down, it was his shoulder and his ribs that hit the wet pavement, and not one single part of the little girl. The sound she made was not a word. Principal Foster reached over silently and paused it, but Victoria said, No, keep it going. I have to see all of it, all." The footage rolled on. Daniel got to his knees, and even in the grain you could see it cost him everything. You could see the way his arm clamped to his side, and the sedan was gone off the edge of the frame, and the parents were flooding in now, and Daniel was not looking at his own ribs, not checking his own body, not doing any of the things a person who has just been hit by a car is entitled to do. He had turned all the way around, and he had Sophie by both shoulders, and he was looking into her face, talking to her. You couldn't hear it, but Victoria didn't need to hear it because Sophie had already told her every word. "You're safe now. You did everything right. You're a brave girl." Then he pulled her into a quick, careful hug, one-armed, because the other arm didn't work anymore, and he held the back of her head for a second, the way you hold the back of a child's head when you are a father, when your hands know how. And then he set her gently toward a woman Victoria assumed was Mrs. Alvarez, handing her off, making sure she was passed into safe hands. And then, on the grainy footage, Victoria watched Daniel Brooks do the thing that broke her completely. He looked at his watch. He was kneeling on wet pavement with broken ribs, having just saved a child's life, surrounded by grateful parents. And he lifted his wrist, and he looked at his watch, and Victoria watched his whole body change. She watched the realization go through him. She watched him look at that watch and understand that he was going to be late, and she watched a man who had just performed the single most selfless act she had ever witnessed be seized, instead of by pride, instead of by shock, by fear. Fear of being late, fear of losing his job. Fear that this, the right thing, the brave thing, the thing that would have made any other person expect a medal, was going to cost him the paycheck that kept his own child fed. She watched him struggle to his feet, waving off the hands that reached to help him. She watched him say something to Mrs. Alvarez, the apology Sophie had said, the 4 apologies, and she watched him walk, hunched and slow, and holding his side out of the frame toward the parking lot, toward his old truck, toward the 40-minute drive across the city in the rain, toward the top floor of a glass tower where a woman was waiting to fire him for being late. The footage ended. For a long time, the only sound in Principal Foster's office was the rain on the window and Victoria Hale trying and failing to breathe normally. "He didn't leave his name," the principal said quietly at last. "3 different parents tried to get it. They wanted to thank him. Mrs. Alvarez actually followed him partway to the parking lot, asking for his name so the school could recognize him, so the news could. And he just kept saying, 'It's fine, I'm fine, she's the one who matters, I really have to go.' He wouldn't take any credit. He wouldn't even stay for the paramedics. The officers are trying to identify him from the plate on the truck, but the angle's bad, and Ms. Hale, because Victoria had gone very, very still. 'I know who he is,' Victoria said. Principal Foster blinked. You know him. His name is Daniel Brooks." The words came out of Victoria like something being pulled up out of deep water, heavy and dripping. "He's 38 years old. He has a daughter, a little girl, 7 years old." She had read the file. She had read the whole file that first week the way she read every file. And she remembered now. She remembered all of it. "Her name is Lily. His wife died 2 years ago. He's raising her alone." "How on earth do you—" "He works for me," Victoria said. And then, because it was the truth, and because the truth had finally caught all the way up to her, and there was no outrunning it anymore, she made herself say the rest of it out loud to a near stranger in an elementary school office, with her daughter, safe and giggling at fuzzy stickers 30 feet away. "He worked for me," Victoria corrected herself, and her voice went to pieces. Past tense. "Because an hour ago he walked into my building 37 minutes late, holding his side with your parking lot's rain still on his shoulders, and my daughter's." She pressed her hand to her mouth. "With something dark on the front of his shirt that I told myself was dirt. And I looked at that man, that exact man on that screen, and I decided he was lazy and selfish and disrespectful, and I fired him, in front of my entire executive team, for being late." Principal Foster's mouth opened. No sound came out. "He didn't tell me," Victoria went on, and now the tears were just running unchecked, and she wasn't wiping them away because there was no point anymore. "That's the thing. That's the thing I can't. He had every reason to tell me. All he had to do was say it. 'I saved a child this morning, that's why I'm late.' 4 words. That's all it would have taken. And I'd have thrown a parade. But he didn't say it. He stood there, and he let me tear him apart, and he never once," her voice cracked, "he never once used your daughter, my daughter, to save himself. Do you understand what that means? He would rather lose his job than trade on the fact that he saved a little girl's life. He wouldn't even do it to keep the roof over his own kid's head. Ms. Hale, I asked him to tell me his story." Victoria laughed, and it was a terrible sound, wet and broken. "I actually said that. I said, 'Tell me your story.' And you know what he said? He looked at the floor and he said, 'You're right, Ms. Hale. I should have called.' That's it. He agreed with me. He apologized to me." She turned away, one hand flat against the wall, holding herself up. "The way he apologized to your Mrs. Alvarez? Same man. Same voice, probably. 'I'm sorry, I have to go.' He apologized to me for being late to my meeting 30 minutes after he stopped a car with his own body to keep my child alive. And I said thank you for 2 years like I was doing him a favor by not writing him up first. And then I sent him home. The principal came around the desk. She was a kind woman, and she had seen a great deal in 22 years of running an elementary school, but she had not seen anything quite like this, and she didn't have words for it, so she did the only thing there was to do, which was put a hand on Victoria Hale's shoulder. "You didn't know," she said. "That's not a comfort," Victoria said. "That's the whole horror of it. I didn't know because I didn't ask. Because I looked at a good man and saw a bad one, because that's easier, because it fit the story I already had in my head. My accountant told me, right before you called." He looked at me across that table and he said, "That man was hurt. Anybody with 2 eyes could see it." He earned one question. "Daniel, are you okay?" And you couldn't give it to him. And I told Harold he didn't call. Like that settled it. Like a phone call was more important than a human being standing in front of me clearly in agony. She turned back around, and her face was wrecked, but under the wreckage, something had gone hard, and certain, the way steel goes hard. He was right. Harold was right. I've been wrong about a lot of things today, but I'm not going to be wrong about the next part. Principal Foster studied her. "What's the next part?" "The next part is I find him," Victoria said. "I find Daniel Brooks and I get him to a hospital because that man has broken ribs, and he drove around all morning on them, and he might be bleeding inside for all I know, and he's got a 7-year-old at home who has already lost one parent, and is not going to lose another one on my watch. That's the next part." She was already moving, already pulling her phone out, already dialing. She got Preston on the second ring. "Preston, listen to me very carefully. Daniel Brooks, the man I terminated this morning. I need his home address, his cell number, and I need to know whether he's still on the company insurance until the end of the month. The answer had better be yes, and I need all of it in the next 90 seconds. Do not tell me you'll get back to me. Do not put me on hold. Go into his file right now while I'm on the line." She listened. Her jaw was tight. Sophie's laughter drifted in from the front desk high and bright and alive, and every peal of it was a small hammer against Victoria's heart, because that laugh existed. That laugh was still in the world, only because of a man she had thrown out into the rain. "Say that again," Victoria said into the phone. "His emergency contact is who?" She listened. "A 7-year-old school," she repeated slowly. "His emergency contact isn't a person. It's his daughter's elementary school. He doesn't have..." She closed her eyes. "He doesn't have anybody else to list. It's just him and Lily. There's no one else." Principal Foster looked away, blinking hard. "Okay," Victoria said, and her voice had steadied, now hardened into purpose, because purpose was the one thing Victoria Hale had never lacked, the one tool that had never failed her, and she was reaching for it now, like a drowning woman reaching for a rope. "Okay, text me the address, text me the number, and Preston reinstate his insurance. Today. Backdate it. I don't care what it costs or who you have to call, that man is covered. As of this second, do you understand me? Whatever happens to him from here on out, this company is paying for it. That's not a request." She hung up. She stood in the middle of the principal's office, phone in hand, tears drying on her face, and for one moment, she was completely still, gathering herself the way you gather yourself at the top of a very high place before you jump. Then she went to the front desk, where her daughter was pressing a fuzzy sticker shaped like a dinosaur onto the back of her own small hand. "Sophie. Look, Mommy, it's a stegosaurus. It's my favorite because of the plates. Baby, I need you to be a big girl for me for a little while, okay? I need you to stay here with Miss Foster and the nice people just for a little bit, and I'm going to come right back and get you. Can you do that?" Sophie looked up. Children are much smarter than adults give them credit for, and Sophie had spent her whole life reading her mother's moods the way sailors read the sky, and she knew this face. This was the face her mother made when something serious and grown-up was happening. "Where are you going?" Victoria knelt down again to be the same size as her daughter, the way Daniel Brooks had knelt to be the same size as her daughter an hour ago on wet pavement with broken ribs. "You know how I promised you we'd make sure the nice man is okay?" Victoria said. "The brave man who kept you safe." Sophie's eyes went wide. "You found him." "I found him, baby. I know exactly who he is. And I'm going to go make sure he's okay right now, just like I promised. Promise, promise." "Can I come? I want to say thank you." "I didn't get to say thank you, he left too fast." Victoria's throat closed. "Not today, sweetheart, but soon. I think—" She had to stop and start again. "I think you're going to get to say thank you to him. I think you're going to know him for a very long time if he'll let us. But right now, I need to go alone and make sure he's okay first. Can you trust me?" Sophie considered this with tremendous seriousness. Then she reached out and very carefully peeled the Stegosaurus sticker off the back of her own hand and pressed it onto the back of her mother's. "Give this to him," Sophie said. "So he knows it's from me. So he knows I said thank you." And Victoria Hale, who had that morning fired the man who saved her daughter's life, looked down at a fuzzy dinosaur sticker on the back of her hand, and something inside her that had been frozen solid for a very long time since her father, since the porch, since all the years of learning that the only person you could count on was yourself. Something in there cracked and began at long last to thaw. "I'll give it to him," she whispered. "I promise, promise." She stood, and she kissed the top of Sophie's head, and she breathed in the smell of her daughter's hair one more time, and then she walked out of that elementary school and into the rain with a dinosaur sticker on her hand, and an address on her phone, and the full, terrible, complete truth finally sitting in her chest where the certainty used to be. She got in her car. She looked at the address Preston had sent. It was on the east side, too, not far from the school, a part of the city where the rent was cheap and the buildings were old, and people worked 2 jobs to stay afloat. She thought about Daniel Brooks, driving 40 minutes across the city on broken ribs to get to a job in a glass tower, and then getting fired and then driving 40 minutes back. She thought about him doing that math in his head. If I explain, I might get pity now and get let go later. If I just take it, maybe I keep the job and getting it wrong, getting fired anyway for nothing, having sacrificed even his own dignity for nothing. She thought about a 7-year-old named Lily, who had already lost her mother, and Victoria Hale, who had built a billion-dollar company on the belief that rules exist for everyone and that personal problems should never interfere with professional responsibility, put her car in drive, and pulled out into the gray Seattle rain, and went to find the one man who had shown her in the space of a single morning exactly how wrong a person could be about what actually matters in this world. She did not know yet that he wasn't at home. She did not know that a neighbor would tell her through a chained door that the quiet man in 2B had staggered up the stairs an hour ago, white as a sheet, checked that his little girl was still at school, and then driven himself. Driven himself alone in pain to a clinic across town because he couldn't afford the emergency room and didn't want to scare his daughter. She did not know that when she finally found him, it would be in a plastic chair in a crowded free clinic waiting room, hunched over, holding his own side, waiting his turn behind a dozen other people, a man who had saved a child's life that morning and could not skip the line to save his own. She did not know any of that yet. She only knew that she was coming, and that for the first time in her life, she was going to have to find out what it looked like to be the one who apologizes, the one who was wrong, the one who has to earn back something she never should have thrown away. The rain came down over Seattle, and Victoria Hale drove east into it, toward the truth she had run from all morning, and toward the quiet man who had never once run from anything at all. The clinic was called Eastside Community Health, and it was the kind of place Victoria Hale had never once had a reason to enter in her entire adult life. The waiting room smelled of industrial disinfectant and wet coats, and too many people in too small a space. A television bolted high in the corner played a game show with the sound off. A baby was crying somewhere near the back. And every single plastic chair was full because this was where you came when you were hurt, and you couldn't afford the alternative. And in a city this size on a rainy Monday, that was a lot of people. Victoria stood in the doorway dripping and scanned the room, and she almost didn't see him. That was the thing that got her later when she thought about it. She almost walked right past him, because Daniel Brooks did not take up space. He had folded himself into a chair in the far corner, hunched forward with his elbows on his knees and his right arm clamped against his side, and he had made himself small. The way a man makes himself small when he has spent his whole life being told in 100 small ways that he is not important enough to take up room. His head was down. His eyes were closed. He looked gray. Daniel, his head came up. For a moment, he just looked at her, and Victoria watched the confusion move across his face, the total impossibility of it. Victoria Hale, in her tailored coat, standing in the doorway of a free clinic in the rain, looking straight at him. He must have thought he was hallucinating. He must have thought the pain had finally caught up to him. And then, when he understood it was real, his face did something that Victoria would carry with her to her grave, because it wasn't anger, and it wasn't hope, and it wasn't even surprise, really. It was shame. He was ashamed. That she was seeing him here, like this, small and hurt, and waiting in line at a place for people who couldn't do better. He started painfully to stand. "Ms. Hale, He winced, one hand going flat against his ribs. "Is everything... Did I forget to sign something I can come by? I don't need to make trouble, I just..." "Sit down." Her voice came out cracked. "Daniel, please, sit down. Don't get up. Please don't get up." He sat, because it hurt too much not to, and she crossed the room to him, past the crying baby, and the wet coats, and the silent game show, and she did something then that no one at Hale Innovations would have believed if they'd seen it, something Victoria herself would not have believed 12 hours earlier. She knelt down in front of him. On the dirty linoleum floor of a free clinic in a coat that cost more than the man in the next chair made in a month, Victoria Hale knelt down so that she was looking up into Daniel Brooks's face instead of down at it. "I know," she said. "I know what you did this morning. I know all of it." She watched him understand. She watched the color that was left drain out of him. Watched the arm tighten against his side. Watched him look away toward the silent television, as though there were somewhere else in the world he could possibly be right now. "It doesn't matter," Daniel said quietly. "Don't." Her voice broke on the word. "Please don't say that. Don't you dare say that to me. Your daughter's okay. That's the only part that matters." He still wasn't looking at her. She's okay? She's not hurt." And that was it. That was the thing that finished Victoria off right there on the floor of Eastside Community Health. Because the first thing this man asked, the first and only thing before his own broken ribs, before the job she'd taken from him, before any apology she owed him, was whether the child was safe. "She's okay," Victoria managed. "She's okay, Daniel. She's not hurt. Not a scratch. Because of you." She had to stop and breathe. "She's back at the school with the principal eating fuzzy stickers. She's laughing. She's alive and she's laughing, and it's because you ran at a moving car with nothing but your own body. That's the only reason. There is no version of this morning where she's okay unless you were there. Then it was worth it," Daniel said simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world, like it wasn't the single most extraordinary sentence Victoria had ever heard. "That's all I need to know. It was worth your job. It was worth me firing you. It was worth Daniel. You have broken ribs, and you're sitting in a waiting room instead of an emergency room because you're worried about the bill, and you're telling me it was worth it." For the first time he looked at her, and there was no accusation in it, which was almost worse. If he had been angry, she could have taken his anger. She had a lifetime of practice taking people's anger. But he wasn't angry. He was just tired and honest and kind in a bone-deep way that had nothing left to prove. "Ms. Hale," he said, "if it was your kid or my job, that was never a hard choice. That's not even a choice. Any decent person makes that trade 100 times out of 100. I didn't do anything special this morning. I did the only thing there was to do." He shifted, and the pain crossed his face, and he breathed through it. "The job that's just a job. I'll find another one. I've started over before. But if I'd stood there in that parking lot and done nothing, and that little girl was gone..." His jaw worked. "There's no starting over from that. Not for me, not for you, not for anybody. So no. I don't regret it. I'd do it again right now with 2 broken arms. Victoria pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, and she felt the fuzzy sticker there, the stegosaurus, still stuck to her skin. She wanted me to give you something, Victoria said. What? Carefully. Victoria peeled the little sticker off the back of her hand, and she reached out, and with a gentleness she didn't know she still had in her, pressed it onto the back of Daniel's, onto the big scarred, work-roughened hand of the man who'd caught her daughter out of the air. It's a stegosaurus, Victoria said, and her voice was coming apart. It's her favorite dinosaur. Because of the plates on its back, she'll tell you all about it. She peeled it off her own hand, and she made me promise to give it to you. She said... Victoria had to stop. She said to give it to you so you'd know she said thank you, because you left too fast. She didn't get to say thank you. And it's been bothering her. A stranger saved her life and drove away hurt, and she didn't get to say thank you. And that's the thing my 9-year-old is worried about right now, Daniel. Not the man who tried to take her. You. She's worried about you. Daniel Brooks looked down at the small fuzzy dinosaur on the back of his hand, and Victoria watched something happen to him that she suspected did not happen very often, because he seemed almost as surprised by it as she was. His face, which had held together through the pain and the shame and the whole impossible morning, came undone. His eyes filled. He turned his face away toward the wall, and his shoulders, those shoulders that had taken the full force of a moving car, so that a child would not have to begin to shake silently. And Victoria understood that this was a man who did not let himself cry, who had not let himself cry in a very long time over much larger things than a sticker. I have a daughter, he said when he could. His voice was thick. Lily. She's 7. I know, Victoria said softly. I know about Lily. She'd love this sticker. He wiped his face roughly with the back of his other hand, embarrassed. Sorry. I'm sorry. It's been a long morning. I don't usually. Don't apologize. Victoria's own tears were running freely now, and she'd given up trying to stop them. God, Daniel, please stop apologizing. That's all you've done all day. You apologized to Mrs. Alvarez in that parking lot. You apologized to me in that boardroom. You said thank you to me on your way out the door. You've been hurt and dismissed and thrown out into the rain, and you keep apologizing and thanking people, and I can't take it, because I'm the one who owes you the apology. I owe you an apology so big, I don't even know where to start finding the words for it. You didn't know, he said. The same thing the principal had said. The same absolution offered too easily by a man who had every right to withhold it and wouldn't. That's exactly the problem, Victoria said. I didn't know because I didn't ask. You walked into my boardroom, hurt, visibly. Hurt. Daniel, anybody could see it. And instead of asking you a single human question, I decided who you were. I decided you were lazy. I decided you were selfish. I looked at the blood on your shirt, and I told myself it was dirt, because dirt fit the story I'd already written about you. And then I fired you. I stood in front of my whole company, and I told you that you don't respect anybody's time. To you. To the man who... She couldn't finish it. She didn't try. They sat there for a moment, the CEO on her knees on the clinic floor, and the maintenance man in the plastic chair, and neither of them said anything, and the game show flickered silently overhead. Why didn't you tell me? Victoria asked finally. It was the question that had been eating her alive since the principal's office. That's what I can't understand. You had it in your hand, Daniel. All you had to do was say 4 words. I saved a child this morning. That's it. I'd have done anything. I'd have given you a week off, a raise, a medal. I'd have called the newspapers. You could have kept your job, kept your insurance, kept everything just by telling me the truth. Why didn't you say it? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, he chose his words carefully the way a careful man does. Because it wouldn't have been true, he said. Not the way you mean it. I didn't do it so I'd have something to trade. If I'd walked in there and used it to save my own skin, held that little girl up like a coupon, like look what I did now, you owe me, then it wouldn't have been about her anymore. It would have been about me. And the second it's about me, it's not the same thing. He turned the sticker-covered hand over slowly, looking at it. My wife used to say, you find out who a man really is by what he does when nobody's keeping score. I've tried to live like that. It's about the only thing I've got left to give my daughter the example. If I'd bought my job back with what happened in that parking lot, I'd have been teaching Lily that you help people so you can collect. And that's not—" he shook his head. "That's not the kind of man I want her to grow up thinking her dad was." Victoria had spent her entire life around powerful people. She had sat across boardroom tables from senators and billionaires and men who ran things she couldn't name. And not one of them, not a single one in 34 years, had ever said anything to her that landed the way that landed. You find out who a man really is by what he does when nobody's keeping score. She thought about her own mourning, about what she'd done when she thought nobody who mattered was watching when it was just a maintenance man, a nobody, an empty chair. She'd been cruel. She'd been cruel because she'd thought it was safe to be cruel, because she'd thought there was no score to keep. That was who Victoria Hale was, when nobody was keeping score. And this man, this quiet man with 3 broken ribs and no health insurance, had run at a moving car. "Daniel Brooks," she said. "Daniel Brooks." "Ms. Hale." "Nothing. I'm trying to understand how I got you so wrong." She wiped her face and stood up, finally her knees stiff from the floor, and she looked around the crowded waiting room at all the people who had been sitting here for hours, and something in her went from grief to motion. "Okay, enough. You're not sitting in this waiting room for one more minute. You've got broken ribs. You might have internal bleeding for all anyone knows, and you have been sitting in a plastic chair for how long? How long have you been here?" "A while." He glanced at the check-in desk. "There's a lot of folks ahead of me. It's fine. They said a couple hours. I've had worse." "You keep saying that. I've had worse." "Daniel, that is not the reassurance you think it is." She was already pulling out her phone. "You are not waiting 2 hours. I'm getting you to a real hospital, a good one right now, and before you say one word about the cost—" She held up a hand. "Your insurance is active. As of 40 minutes ago, I had it reinstated and backdated. Whatever this costs, whatever the imaging costs, whatever a hospital stay costs. If it comes to that, the company is covering all of it. You are covered. That is done. That is not up for discussion, and it is not charity, and it is not pity, so don't you dare call it that." Daniel opened his mouth, and she saw the objection coming. The reflexive pride of a man who had never once in his life let anyone carry anything for him, and she cut it off at the root. "You put your body between a car and my child," Victoria said low and fierce. "You have a 7-year-old at home who already lost her mother. You are not going to sit in a free clinic bleeding internally because you're too proud to let me get you to a doctor. Lily needs her father in one piece. So you're going to let me help you, Daniel, not for me and not even for you, for her, for Lily. Because she's already been through enough and she does not need to lose you too. Can you accept it if it's for her?" And that only that got through to him. She had found the one argument a man like Daniel Brooks couldn't refuse. Not for himself, for his kid. He was quiet. Then he nodded once slowly. "For Lily," he said. "Okay. For Lily." "For Lily," Victoria agreed. She made 2 phone calls in the next 90 seconds, and Victoria Hale making phone calls was a force of nature. The first was to the best orthopedic and trauma hospital in the city, where the company held a corporate wellness contract, and where the name Hale carried a weight that turned 2-hour waits into 10-minute ones. The second was to Preston arranging a car, arranging the paperwork, arranging for someone to be waiting at the entrance so that Daniel would not have to walk one extra step than necessary. And then she helped him up. He tried to refuse the arm. Of course he did, but he was hurt worse than he'd let on. She could see it now up close, the way the pain had sunk into his face and settled there, and when he stood, he swayed, and Victoria got a shoulder under his good arm before he could fall, and he let her finally, because he had to. "Easy," she said. "I've got you. Lean on me. I've got you. I've got you." The same words she'd said to Sophie on the floor of the principal's office. She heard the echo of it, and something turned over in her chest. They made it out to the sidewalk slowly, and the rain had gentled to a mist, and the car Preston had sent was already pulling up to the curb, and Victoria eased Daniel into the back seat, with a care she usually reserved for nothing at all, because Victoria Hale did not, as a rule, take care of people. She hired people to take care of things. She solved things with money and delegation and force of will. She had forgotten somewhere over the long climb up that some things you have to do with your own two hands. She got in beside him. As the car pulled away from the clinic, Daniel leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes, and for a moment, he just breathed carefully in the shallow way of a man with broken ribs. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said. "Sure. Your file said you used to be an emergency rescue technician before you came to us." She'd read it that first week and filed it away as a line item, an unremarkable fact about an unremarkable employee, and she was ashamed now of how little she'd thought about it. Search and rescue, disaster response. You did that for years. 11 years, Daniel said, eyes still closed. Why'd you stop a man who does what you did this morning without even thinking about it? That's not something you learn. That's who you are. Why would you walk away from a job that was made for you? Daniel was quiet for a moment. The car hummed through the wet streets. "Because it almost took me from her," he said finally. "There was a building collapse about 2.5 years ago. Bad one. We were pulling people out and there was a secondary collapse and I got caught under part of it. Broke my leg in 3 places, cracked my skull. I was in the hospital for 6 weeks. He opened his eyes and looked out the window. And my wife, Sarah, she got sick around that same time. We didn't know how bad, not at first. And there I was, laid up in a hospital bed from doing my job no use to anybody, while my wife was starting to die across town. And I couldn't be there for her the way I should have been, because I'd spent 11 years being there for strangers. Daniel! She passed about 8 months later. He said it flatly, the way people say the things that are too big to say any other way. And Lily was 4.5, and I looked at that little girl and I thought that job is going to send me home in a box someday. Might be next year, might be in 10 years, but that's how those jobs end more often than they should. And she's already going to grow up without a mother. I wasn't going to let her grow up without a father, too. Not for anybody. Not for any building, any disaster, any medal. He looked at Victoria. So I quit. I found the quietest, safest, most boring job I could get. Fixing air handlers and unclogging drains at a tech company. Nobody's life on the line. Home every night by 6 to make her dinner. And I've never regretted it. Not for one single day. Victoria sat with that. And then this morning, she said quietly, you ran right back into the exact kind of danger you gave up your whole career to avoid. For a child you'd never met, knowing you had a daughter at home who needs you. Yeah, Daniel said. Well, you couldn't not do it. No, he admitted. I couldn't. Some things you don't get to choose. I saw her getting dragged toward that car, and my body was already moving before my head caught up. And the whole time this voice in me was screaming, Lily, think of Lily. You've got a kid. And I heard it, I did. But there was a kid right there in front of me getting taken, and I thought... He stopped. I thought if that were Lily, if some stranger stood there and did nothing while somebody took my Lily, I'd never forgive them as long as I lived. So how could I be the one who does nothing? How could I look Lily in the eye that night if I'd stood there and watched it happen? You'd never have told her, Victoria said. You wouldn't have told anyone. You didn't. That's different, Daniel said. I'd have known. I'd have known. Victoria looked at this man. This quiet, broken, extraordinary man bleeding somewhere inside from saving her child. And she understood that she was in the presence of something she had spent her whole adult life telling herself didn't really exist. Not in the world she moved through anyway. Genuine goodness. The kind that isn't performed, isn't leveraged, isn't traded. The kind that just is quietly whether or not anybody is keeping score. And she had fired it. She had looked straight at it on the worst day of its life, and she had thrown it out into the rain. I'm going to make this right, she said. It came out of her not as a plan, but as a vow, low and absolute. I don't know how yet. I know I can't undo this morning. I know an apology isn't enough, I know that. But I am going to make this right, Daniel. That's a promise, and I keep my promises. Daniel looked at her, and there was something gentle and a little sad in his expression. The look of a man who has had a lot of promises made to him over the years and watched most of them dissolve. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "You got me to a hospital. That's more than fair. We're square." "We are not remotely square." "Ms. Hale." "Victoria," she said. "My name is Victoria. You saved my daughter's life. I think we're past Ms. Hale." The car pulled up under the bright portico of the hospital where, just as Victoria had arranged, a nurse and a wheelchair and an orderly were already waiting, and the door opened, and hands reached in to help Daniel out gently, carefully, the way he should have been helped hours ago. And as they eased him into the wheelchair, Daniel Brooks looked down at the back of his hand, at the small fuzzy stegosaurus that Sophie Hale had peeled off her own skin and sent across the city to say a thank you she hadn't gotten to say. And a slow, tired, real smile crossed his face for the first time all day. "Tell Sophie," he said as they began to wheel him toward the doors. "Tell her I got her sticker. Tell her it's the best thank you anybody ever gave me. And tell her—" His voice caught just slightly. "Tell her she was really brave this morning, braver than she knows. You tell her that." "I'll tell her," Victoria said, walking alongside the wheelchair, and she was crying again and not bothering to hide it. "I'll tell her every word." And then they wheeled him through the automatic doors and into the bright, clean, humming hospital. And for the first time since 7:44 that morning, Daniel Brooks was going to be taken care of. Victoria Hale stood in the entrance and watched him disappear down the corridor, and she thought about the 7-year-old named Lily, who would need to be picked up from school in a few hours, and about the man who had almost died twice in one day, and complained about neither, and about the version of herself who had stood in a boardroom that very morning and been so certain, so completely certain, that she was the one teaching everybody else a lesson about what really mattered. She had been the student all along. She just hadn't known it until now. The scans came back 3 hours later, and the doctor found Victoria in the waiting room, where she had refused to leave despite having a company to run, and a daughter to collect, and 100 fires that needed putting out. 3 fractured ribs, the doctor said. A hairline fracture in the left forearm, significant soft tissue bruising along the whole left side. He's got a hematoma we're going to watch overnight, but there's no active internal bleeding, thank God, which frankly, given that he was walking around on this for the better part of a morning, is a small miracle. Another few hours and I'd be telling you a very different story. But he's going to be okay. He's going to be very sore for 6 weeks, and he's going to be okay. The doctor studied her. "Can I ask, the paperwork says you're his employer?" "I am." Victoria paused. "I was. It's complicated. He's my employee." "Well, whatever he is to you, I'll tell you what he is to me. In 20 years, I have almost never seen a person take that kind of trauma and then get up and drive across a city on it. The body doesn't want to do that. Everything in you is screaming to lie down. Whatever that man was trying to get to this morning, he wanted it badly enough to override every survival instinct he had." He shook his head. "That's not toughness. Toughness runs out. That's something else. That's a man who decided something mattered more than his own body and just refused to quit." Victoria didn't tell the doctor what Daniel had been trying to get to. She didn't tell him that the thing Daniel had overridden every survival instinct to reach was a boardroom where a woman was waiting to fire him. Some things were too shameful to say out loud twice in one day. "Can I see him? He's resting. We've got him on something for the pain. Finally, he fought us on that too, kept saying he needed to be clear-headed to pick up his kid. We had to promise him someone would handle the kid before he'd let us dose him." The doctor raised an eyebrow. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about that?" "I'm handling the kid," Victoria said. "Tell him it's handled. Tell him Lily is handled, and he can rest." And she meant it, though she wasn't entirely sure yet how, because it turned out that arranging to pick up a 7-year-old girl you have never met, whose father you fired that morning from an elementary school, when you are not on any of the school's approved contact lists, is not a thing even Victoria Hale can accomplish with a phone call and force of will. She found that out when she called Lily's school, and a very polite, very immovable office administrator explained that under no circumstances could a child be released to a stranger employer, or not, no matter what had happened to the father, without either the father's explicit authorization or a court order, or the involvement of Child Protective Services. And did Ms. Hale understand that if the father was incapacitated, and there was no one on the emergency contact list, then CPS was in fact the protocol, and someone would need to— "No," Victoria said. "Absolutely not. That little girl has been through enough for one lifetime. She is not spending 1 minute in the custody of the state. Give me the school. I'm coming down there myself, and we're going to figure this out like human beings." She went back up to the ward first. Daniel was propped up in the hospital bed, pale against the pillows, an IV in the back of his hand, the same hand that still, she noticed, had a small fuzzy stegosaurus stuck to it. He'd refused to let them peel it off. He looked exhausted and drugged and profoundly uncomfortable, being in a bed that someone else was paying for. But when he saw Victoria, something in him eased. "They tell you I'm going to live," he said. "3 ribs your arm and a bruise the size of Rhode Island. You're going to be miserable for 6 weeks, and then you're going to be fine." She pulled a chair up beside the bed. "Daniel, I need something from you, and I need you to not argue with me about it because we're on the clock. Lily's school won't release her to me. I'm a stranger. They're talking about calling CPS, and I need you to authorize me right now in writing however they need it, so that I can go get your daughter, and she does not spend 1 second thinking nobody's coming for her." The effect was immediate. The drug haze burned off his face, and he tried to sit up, and the pain caught him, and he sank back with a hiss. "Lily, what time is it she gets out at 3 if nobody's there? She'll be scared she doesn't do well when—" "That's why I'm here. That's why we're doing this now. I will go get her myself. I will sit with her until you're out of here. But I need your say-so, or the system takes over, and neither one of us wants that. You'd do that." He was looking at her strangely. "You'd pick up my kid." "Daniel, I would carry your kid home on my back through this rain if that's what it took. Yes, I'd do that. Tell me how to make it legal." He gave her the authorization. The hospital had a notary. Victoria made it happen in 11 minutes, because when Victoria Hale decided something was going to happen in 11 minutes, it happened in 11 minutes. And before she left, Daniel caught her wrist with his good hand. "She's shy," he said. "She's going to be scared a stranger showing up. Tell her—" He thought about it. "Tell her Daddy's okay, but he had to see a doctor. Don't scare her. And tell her the password." "The password? We've got a password. In case I ever had to send somebody she didn't know to get her, we set it up after Sarah passed because it was just us, and I always worried, what if something happened to me? How would she know who to trust?" His voice roughened. "The password is blueberry pancakes. It's her favorite. If you say blueberry pancakes, she'll know I sent you. She'll know it's safe." Victoria wrote it on her palm next to where the stegosaurus had been. "Blueberry pancakes. Take care of her," Daniel said. "Please. She's everything." "I know she is," Victoria said. "I've got a Sophie. I know exactly what she is to you. I'll take care of her like she's my own. I promise. Promise." The word came out before she thought about it, Sophie's word, and Daniel almost smiled. Lily Brooks was as advertised shy. Victoria found her sitting alone on a bench outside the aftercare room, a small, serious girl with her father's steady dark eyes and a backpack almost as big as she was, watching the door for a man who wasn't coming. And when a strange woman in an expensive coat crouched down in front of her, Lily went very still and very quiet, the way a child goes still when they have already learned far too young that the world can take the people you love without asking. "Hi, Lily," Victoria said gently. "My name's Victoria. I'm a friend of your dad's." Lily said nothing. Her eyes said everything. "Where's my dad? Why isn't it my dad?" "Your dad's okay?" Victoria said, keeping her voice easy, keeping the terror out of it. "He's completely okay. But he hurt his side today helping somebody, and he had to go see a doctor to get it fixed up. He couldn't come get you himself, so he sent me, and he told me to tell you something so you'd know it was really him who sent me, and it was safe to come with me." Lily's chin lifted just slightly. Testing. "Blueberry pancakes," Victoria said, and Victoria watched the whole world change on that little girl's face. She watched the fear break and the shoulders drop and the breath come out because her daddy had a system. Her daddy had thought of this. Her daddy had made sure that even if he couldn't come, there was a way to know. And the lady knew the words, so the lady was safe, so it was going to be okay. "Is he really okay?" Lily whispered. "You're not just saying it." "I'm not just saying it. I saw him with my own eyes about 20 minutes ago. He's in a bed with a little TV and everything, and he made me promise to come get you first thing before he'd even let the doctors give him his medicine. The very first thing he thought about was you." Victoria held out her hand. "You want to go see him? I can take you right now." Lily put her small hand in Victoria's. And something happened in Victoria Hale's chest, holding that small, trusting hand that she did not have a word for, that had been trying to happen all day, since the boardroom, since the phone call, since the clinic floor. A kind of breaking open. A kind of thaw completing itself. They stopped for Sophie on the way. Victoria was not about to leave her own daughter behind, and some instinct told her that these two girls should meet, that something was being knit together here that was bigger than one bad morning. And in the back seat of the car on the way to the hospital, a remarkable thing happened, the kind of thing adults forget children are capable of. They just started talking. "That's a cool backpack," Sophie said. "Is that a dinosaur?" "It's a triceratops," Lily said solemnly. 3 horns. That's what tri means. 3. "I like the Stegosaurus best, because of the plates. I gave my Stegosaurus sticker to a man today. He saved me from a bad guy." Lily went quiet, then carefully. "My dad saves people. That's why he had to go to the doctor. He helped somebody and got hurt." And Victoria, driving, watched in the rearview mirror as the 2 little girls looked at each other, and she saw the exact moment the math happened. The exact moment something clicked into place that neither of them had words for, and neither of them needed words for. And Sophie said very quietly, "Was it your dad? The man who saved me? Did your dad save me?" Lily didn't know, but Victoria did. "Yeah, baby," Victoria said softly from the front seat, her voice thick. "It was Lily's dad. Lily's dad is the one who kept you safe this morning." And in the back seat, Sophie Hale unbuckled her seatbelt, which she was absolutely not supposed to do in a moving car, and which Victoria did not have the heart to correct. And she scooted over, and she threw both arms around Lily Brooks, this shy little stranger, and she hugged her fiercely, and she said into Lily's hair, "Your dad is the bravest person in the whole world. He's a superhero. You're so lucky. You have a superhero for a dad." And shy little Lily Brooks, who had lost her mother and spent every day quietly afraid of losing her father too, hugged this strange girl back and said in a small, wondering voice, "I know." Victoria had to pull over for a second. She told the girls she was checking directions. She was not checking directions. She was sitting at the side of the road with her hand over her mouth, watching 2 children she was responsible for hold on to each other in her back seat, and thinking about how close the world had come that very morning to a version of this day where one of those little girls was gone forever. And the only thing standing between that version and this one had been a quiet man who ran at a car and then apologized for being late. When they got to the hospital, Lily bolted from the car before Victoria had fully stopped and ran through the automatic doors, and Victoria caught up just in time to see her round the corner into Daniel's room and launch herself at the bed with a cry of, "Daddy!" that broke every heart on the ward. Hey, easy, easy, Peanut." Daniel caught her one-armed, wincing hard, but there was nothing in the world that could have made him not catch her. "I'm okay. Daddy's okay." "Oof, careful of the side, baby. That side's got an owie. There you go. There's my girl." "Victoria said you helped somebody and got hurt." "I did. But I'm all fixed up now. Look, I even got a fancy bed." He smoothed her hair back, and over the top of her head, his eyes found Victoria in the doorway, and the look he gave her there was so much in it. Gratitude. Something like disbelief. And underneath it, a question he hadn't asked yet. Sophie had come in behind Victoria and was hanging back, suddenly shy, in front of the man from the parking lot, the man from the video, the superhero. And Daniel saw her, and his whole face softened. "You must be Sophie," he said gently. Sophie nodded wide-eyed. "I got your sticker." He held up his hand, and there it was, the little fuzzy stegosaurus still stuck to the back of his hand through the IV and the scans and everything. "See, I've been wearing it all day. It's the best present anybody ever gave me. I wanted to say thank you for it." "You're the one who's supposed to get thanked," Sophie said in the direct way of children. "You saved me. I didn't even get to say thank you. You left too fast. Thank you. Thank you for saving me." "You're welcome, sweetheart." Daniel's voice went rough. "But you did the hard part. You held on. You were brave. I just helped a little." "You got hit by a car." "Yeah, well." Daniel almost laughed, and then didn't, because laughing hurt. "Between you and me, I don't recommend it." And then the two girls were both up on the bed, careful of the owie side, and Lily was telling Sophie about the Triceratops backpack, and Sophie was telling Lily about the fuzzy stickers, and the two of them fell into that instant total friendship that only children can manage, and Daniel Brooks lay back against the pillows with his daughter tucked under his good arm, and watched them, and Victoria stood in the doorway, and watched all three of them, and for a long moment, nobody said anything, because nothing needed saying. Later, when the girls had wound down, and the nurse had brought them juice and crackers, and they were sprawled together in the room's single armchair, watching cartoons on Sophie's tablet, Victoria pulled her chair close to the bed and spoke low so only Daniel could hear. "I've been thinking," she said, "about how I make this right. And I want to say it wrong first so you can tell me it's wrong, and then we'll get to the right version." "Okay," Daniel said warily. "The wrong version is, I give you your job back. I double your salary. I put out a press release, local hero, all of it. I write you a check big enough that you never have to fix another air handler as long as you live." She watched his face close, watched exactly the reaction she'd expected. "See, I can tell by your face. That's the wrong version. That's me buying my way out of feeling guilty. That's me making it about me again. You'd hate it. You'd take the job back out of politeness and you'd resent it, and it'd be pity dressed up as generosity, and you don't want pity, and honestly, you shouldn't." Daniel was quiet, studying her. That's exactly it. How'd you know?" "Because you told me in the car. You find out who a man is by what he does when nobody's keeping score." "I've been thinking about that all day. So here's the thing, Daniel. I don't want to give you anything. Because you don't want to be given things. You want to earn things. That's the whole reason you didn't use Sophie to save your job this morning, because a job you get by trading on a rescue isn't earned, it's bought, and you don't want anything you didn't earn." She leaned forward. "So I'm not going to give you your job back. I'm going to do something else." "What?" "I've been running a company for 11 years that has no idea what to do when something actually goes wrong. We've got fire drills nobody takes seriously, and an evacuation plan in a binder nobody's read, and a safety compliance report that," her voice caught, "that a maintenance man wrote on his own time on a Friday night with a 2-page appendix. Nobody asked for that, flagged 7 things in red and begged me not to let the budget cut them. I read it this morning, Daniel. After I fired you. I read that report and I didn't understand what I was looking at. I do now." Daniel had gone very still. "I want to create a real position," Victoria said. "Director of Safety and Emergency Operations. Real authority, real budget, real title. Someone whose whole job is making sure that if something bad ever happens in my building, people live. Someone who thinks about the red items. And I think you might be the most qualified person on the entire West Coast to do that job." She held up a hand before he could speak. "But here's the part that matters. I'm not giving it to you. I'm going to post it, publicly. And you're going to apply, and you're going to interview, and you're going to compete against every other candidate fair and square. And if you're the best one, which I suspect you will be, but I'm not promising anything, then you get it. Because you earned it. Not because you saved my kid. Not because I owe you. Because you're the best. No special treatment. No pity. No shortcut." For a long moment, Daniel Brooks didn't say anything. Then he looked over at the armchair where his daughter and Victoria's daughter were tangled up together, laughing at something on the tablet. 2 little girls who by every right should never have met, alive and safe, and building a friendship in a hospital room. and something moved across his face. "You'd really make me compete for it," he said. "Even after everything." "Especially after everything," Victoria said. "Because I finally understand you. And a man like you doesn't want the world handed to him. He wants a fair shot at earning it. That I can give you. The rest is up to you." Daniel looked back at her, and slowly, for the first time since she'd found him folded into that plastic chair in the clinic, a real smile spread across his face. Not the tired one, not the sad one, but a real one. The smile of a man who has just been offered the one thing he actually wanted, offered in the one way he could actually accept it. "Post the job," he said. "I'll apply." "You'll have to beat out some good candidates." "Good," Daniel said. "Then it'll mean something when I get it." And Victoria Hale laughed, a real laugh, wet and surprised and lighter than any sound she'd made in years. And across the room, both little girls looked up at the sound, and Sophie grinned, and Lily grinned, and for the first time in a very long time, in a hospital room on a rainy Monday that had started as the worst day of everyone's lives, it felt like something was beginning instead of ending. The job posting went up 11 days later, after Daniel's ribs had healed enough for him to sit through an interview without his breath catching, and Victoria kept her word about all of it. She did not tip the scales. She did not tell the hiring committee who Daniel Brooks was or what he had done. She wrote the job description honestly and demandingly, and she watched 43 applications come in, and she made sure Daniel's got no more and no less consideration than any other. "You could have at least told them I'd be an easy hire," Daniel said the morning of the final round. He was sitting in the lobby of Hale Innovations, in the only sport coat he owned, a little tight in the shoulders, holding a folder of printouts he'd stayed up half the night preparing. "I could have." Victoria agreed. "But then you'd always wonder, and so would everybody else. This way, when you walk out of that room with the job, nobody in this building, including you, will ever be able to say you didn't earn it." She straightened his collar, a gesture so unlike the old Victoria Hale that Preston passing by with a stack of files nearly dropped them. "Now go in there and be the best candidate they've ever seen, which won't be hard because you are." He was. The committee didn't know his history, but they knew competence when it sat down across the table from them. And Daniel Brooks talked about emergency egress and structural vulnerabilities, and the 7 red items in a way that made 3 seasoned executives lean forward in their chairs. When the head of HR asked him near the end the standard closing question, "Why do you want this job?" Daniel didn't give the standard answer. "Because I spent 11 years pulling people out of buildings after something went wrong," he said. "And I got tired of showing up too late. This job is a chance to show up before, to build the thing that means nobody ever has to get pulled out of anything. I've buried the too late version of this work. I'd like a shot at the in-time version." He got the job, unanimously, on the merits. And when Victoria got the committee's recommendation on her desk, Daniel, Brooks' first choice, no reservations. She signed it. And then she sat alone in her office for a moment, and she thought about the empty chair, and the torn shirt, and the words, "You don't respect anybody's time." And she thought about how close she'd come to never knowing what she'd almost thrown away. Then she buzzed Preston and told him to schedule the announcement and to make sure there was cake, because the man liked to pretend he didn't, but everybody likes cake. Daniel started 3 weeks after that, and the change he made was not loud, and that was the whole point. The best safety work is invisible. The disaster that never happens. The fire that gets caught while it's still a spark. But over the months that followed, quietly, methodically, Daniel Brooks rebuilt the entire safety architecture of Hale Innovations from the studs. He walked every floor. He rewrote every protocol. He funded the 7 red items and then found 4 more nobody had thought of. He ran drills that people grumbled about until the day a real electrical fire started in a server room on the 9th floor and 400 people were out on the sidewalk in under 6 minutes, with not a single injury, because a quiet man had made them practice something they hadn't wanted to practice, and Victoria had stood on that sidewalk in the cold counting heads, and finding all of them, every single one, and understood in her bones what it was she had almost fired. But the real change wasn't in the building. The real change was in her. It started small. She started asking questions before she answered them. She started catching herself in the half-second before judgment, the way you catch yourself at the top of a staircase, that little lurch of weight. When a project manager came in 3 days late on a deliverable, the old Victoria would have had a verdict ready before he finished his first sentence. The new Victoria heard herself say, "Walk me through what happened." And then, more remarkably, she listened to the answer. And the answer was that the man's father was dying in a hospice in Portland, and he'd been driving down every weekend and hadn't wanted to make excuses. And Victoria gave him 3 weeks and a company car for the drive, and the man wept in her office, and productivity did not collapse, and the machine did not fall apart. And one of the load-bearing beliefs of Victoria Hale's entire adult life, that compassion and excellence were enemies, quietly cracked and fell away. "You're different." Harold told her one evening, the two of them alone in the boardroom after everyone else had gone home, the same boardroom where it had all started. "I've been trying to put my finger on it for months. I don't know. You're softer, but you're not weaker. If anything, your people would run through a wall for you now. They didn't used to. They used to just run from you." "I fired a man for saving my daughter's life, Harold," Victoria said quietly. "You don't come back from a thing like that the same person. You don't get to." "No," Harold agreed. "I don't suppose you do." He was quiet for a moment. "You know, I said something to you that morning, that one day you'd find out why he didn't call, and you'd better be sitting down when you did." "I remember. I've been an accountant for 40 years, Vic. I make my living being right about numbers, but I have never in my life been so unhappy to be right about anything." He looked at her. "And I have never been so glad to watch someone prove me wrong about them afterward." Victoria didn't trust herself to answer that, so she just reached over and squeezed the old man's hand. But it was outside the office that the deepest change took root, because some things can't be fixed at a desk, and some debts can't be paid in job titles. And the truest part of what grew out of that terrible morning grew of all places at a kitchen table. It began with Sophie, who would not let it go. Sophie, who, in the weeks after, asked about Lily every single day. "Can Lily come over? Can we call Lily? Is Lily's daddy better? Can Lily come to my birthday?" Until Victoria, who could refuse a room full of investors without blinking, found she could not refuse her own 9-year-old daughter. This one thing, and honestly did not want to. Not want. "I don't want to intrude on him," Victoria confessed to Harold. "He's proud. He's got his job now, fair and square, and the last thing I want is for him to think I'm hovering, that this is charity, that I'm the boss checking up on the help. I keep worrying that everything I do he's going to read as pity." "So don't make it about you," Harold said. "Make it about the kids." Which is how, on a Sunday afternoon, 2 months after the worst Monday of everyone's lives, Victoria Hale found herself standing on the doorstep of a small apartment on the east side of the city, holding a grocery bag, and feeling for the first time, in longer than she could remember, genuinely nervous. Daniel opened the door in a t-shirt and an apron, a dish towel over one shoulder, and blinked at her. "Victoria, Sophie has asked me 11,000 times if she can see Lily," Victoria said in a rush, before she could lose her nerve. "And I know I'm the last person who should be showing up at your door, and if you want me to leave, I'll leave, and I'll never mention it again. But my daughter loves your daughter, and I brought the ingredients for blueberry pancakes because it seemed like the right thing to bring, and that's it. That's the whole plan. Pancakes, if you'll have us." For a moment, Daniel just looked at her standing there on his doorstep in jeans and no makeup. A billionaire holding a bag of flour and eggs, and something crossed his face that she couldn't quite read. Then he stepped back and opened the door wider. "Lily," he called over his shoulder, "you've got a visitor, and her mom brought pancake stuff." And a small shape came flying down the hallway, shrieking, "Sophie!" And Sophie came flying past Victoria's legs, shrieking, "Lily!" And the two of them collided in the doorway and fell into each other like they'd been apart for years instead of weeks. And Daniel looked at Victoria over the top of their heads and said dryly, "Well, I guess we're making pancakes." They made pancakes. Daniel's kitchen was small and warm, and cluttered with the honest clutter of a single father doing his best. Lily's drawings taped crooked to the refrigerator, a calendar with pickup times, circled a photograph on the windowsill of a smiling woman with Lily's eyes that Victoria understood without being told was Sarah. And Victoria, who had a personal chef and a kitchen the size of Daniel's whole apartment, and could not remember the last time she'd cracked an egg herself, stood at his counter and learned how to flip a pancake without breaking it, while two little girls fought cheerfully over who got to add the blueberries. "You're doing it wrong," Daniel said, watching her mangle one. "I'm a CEO. I delegate the flipping." "Not in this kitchen you don't. Here." He came up beside her and took her wrist the same easy, careful way he'd taken Sophie's shoulders in that parking lot hands that knew how to be gentle and guided the spatula. "Wait for the bubbles. See? When the bubbles pop and stay open, then you flip. You've got to be patient. You can't rush it just because you want it done." "Patience isn't really my strong suit." "No," Daniel agreed deadpan. "I got that impression the first day we met." And Victoria laughed, startled, delighted, a little, horrified, and swatted him with the dish towel, and he grinned, and something eased between them. Some last bit of the old formality and guilt, and boss and employee dissolving in the steam over a griddle, and they were just two tired parents making pancakes for their kids on a Sunday. And it was Victoria thought the most normal she had felt in her entire adult life. That Sunday became another Sunday, and then it was every Sunday. And the pancakes became a thing, an institution, a fixed point. The Brooks and the Hales, one apartment or the other, the girls tearing off to play. The second they arrived, the adults left in the kitchen to talk. And it was in those kitchens over those months that Daniel Brooks came to see the thing about Victoria Hale that nobody else in her whole life had ever bothered to look for. "You're exhausted," he told her one Sunday quietly while the girls built a fort in the living room and the rain came down outside. "Not tired, exhausted, bone deep. You've been exhausted since the day I met you, and I don't think you even know it anymore. I run a billion-dollar company, Daniel. Of course I'm tired. That's not what I mean." He set down his coffee. "You carry everything, every problem, every person, every mistake. You pick it up and you carry it, and you never once put it down. You've got this whole company on your back, and you've got Sophie, and you've got," he gestured vaguely, "this idea, this thing in your head, that if you ever stop being perfect for 1 second, the whole thing collapses. Where'd that come from?" "Because nobody's born like that. Somebody taught it to you." Victoria stared into her coffee for a long moment, and then for the first time in years, for the first time maybe ever, she told the truth about her father. The porch, the waiting, the graduations he missed, and the excuses he always had, and the exact moment at 9 years old, the same age Sophie was now, when she had decided that she would never ever be the kind of person who let people down, because being let down was the worst thing in the world, and she was never going to make anybody feel the way her father made her feel. "So I got perfect," she said. "I got so perfect nobody could ever accuse me of what I accused him of. On time, every time, no excuses. And I built a whole company on it, and I built a whole self on it, and it worked. Daniel, that's the thing. It worked right up until the morning. I looked at a hurt man in my boardroom, and I couldn't see anything except my father always late, always with a reason. I fired you because of a man who's been dead for 6 years. You paid for his sins. I'm so sorry." Daniel was quiet for a while. "You spend your whole life fixing everything," he said finally. "Making everything perfect so nothing can ever hurt you again. But that's the trap, Victoria. Because some things don't need fixing. Some things just need—" He searched for the word understanding. "That morning didn't need you to be perfect. It just needed you to ask one question. That's all. And you couldn't because you were too busy holding the whole world up." He looked at her and his voice gentled. "You're allowed to put it down sometimes. The world doesn't fall apart. I promise. I've put it down before. I'm still here." Victoria felt something behind her eyes and blinked it back. "How are you so wise?" she said, trying to make it light. "You fix air handlers." "I fixed air handlers," he corrected. I'm the director of safety and emergency operations now. I'll have you know I have a very fancy title. I earned it too. Nobody handed it to me." And he grinned, and she laughed, and the moment lifted, but the thing he'd said stayed with her, and she carried it out of that kitchen and into the rest of her life. And slowly over the seasons that followed, Victoria Hale learned clumsily, imperfectly, with a lot of backsliding, to put the world down now and then, and to discover that it was still there when she picked it back up. Winter turned to spring. The Sunday pancakes continued. Sophie and Lily became in the total way of childhood sisters, in everything but name. Finishing each other's sentences, sleeping over so often that both apartments had a drawer for the other kids' clothes. And somewhere in there, so gradually that neither of them could have named the day it happened, the thing between Victoria and Daniel stopped being about guilt and stopped being about a debt, and quietly, cautiously became something else. Something neither of them said out loud for a long time, because both of them had been broken by the world in ways that made them careful. But it was there, in the way she saved him the last cup of coffee, in the way he learned how she took it, in the way two tired, careful people slowly let each other in. On a warm evening almost a year after the morning that had started, everything, Victoria and Daniel stood outside the glass tower of Hale Innovations, waiting for the girls who were inside saying goodbye to Harold, who had appointed himself their honorary grandfather, and spoiled them accordingly. The sky over Seattle was doing the thing it does on the rare clear evenings, going gold and pink over the water. And Victoria looked up at the building where all of it had begun, and she smiled. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Do you ever think about that morning, the real one, the first one?" Daniel followed her gaze up the glass face of the building, and he was quiet for a second, and then a slow smile crossed his face. "The morning you fired me." "The morning I fired you," she said, and she could laugh about it now a little, the way you can eventually laugh about the scar once the wound is long closed. "I used to think it was the worst decision I ever made in my life. I used to lie awake over it. The look on your face? Thank you for the 2 years. I thought I'd never forgive myself." And now, Victoria looked at him. Really looked at him, this quiet, extraordinary man who had run at a moving car for a stranger's child, and then apologized for being late, who had refused her pity and earned his place, who had taught her more about what a person is actually worth in a single morning than she'd learned in 34 years of climbing over everyone in her way. The man who had shown up hurt and bleeding at the door of her whole ordered life and cracked it open and let the light in. "Now I think it might have been the decision that changed everything," she said softly. "Not the one I meant it to be, but the one I needed." Daniel reached over and took her hand, and this time there was no sticker on it and no password written on her palm and no guilt in it. Just his hand and hers easy. The bubbles finally popped, both of them patient enough now to have waited for it. "You know what I think," he said. "What?" "I think you didn't fire me that morning. I think you fired the person you used to be. She's the one who walked out of that boardroom. And the woman standing here." He squeezed her hand. "She's the one who showed up at a free clinic and got down on her knees on a dirty floor and said she was sorry. That woman didn't exist that morning. You had to lose something to find her. Maybe it had to hurt that much for it to change anything at all." Victoria didn't say anything. She just leaned her head against his shoulder. The good side, the one without the old ache, and watched the sun go down over the city and behind the glass. High up in the lobby, 2 little girls pressed their faces to the window and waved, and an old accountant stood behind them smiling. And everything that had been broken on a rainy Monday morning stood whole and healed in the gold evening light. She had built an empire by controlling every detail of her life, by being perfect, by never once being late, by trusting no one, and needing nothing, and holding the whole world up alone. She had believed with the certainty of Scripture that this was strength, that this was what it took, that the moment you let someone in, the moment you asked, instead of assumed the moment you let yourself be soft, everything you'd built would come crashing down. She had been wrong about that, the way she had been wrong about a man in a torn shirt on a rainy morning. Because the truth she had learned on her knees on a clinic floor, the truth she had learned in a small warm kitchen over blueberry pancakes, the truth she had learned from a quiet man who ran toward danger and away from praise, was that she had never been stronger than the day she finally let herself be wrong, and said she was sorry and asked to be forgiven and let two broken people become somehow one whole family. Sometimes the person you judge too quickly is the person who saves your whole life without you ever knowing it. Sometimes the worst mistake you ever make becomes the doorway to the best thing that ever happens to you. And sometimes, if you are very lucky and brave enough to get down on your knees and admit you were wrong, the morning you think you lost everything turns out to be the exact morning your real life finally began. Victoria Hale had walked into that boardroom certain she was protecting everything that mattered. She had walked out of it, having nearly destroyed the best man she would ever know. And in the end, standing in the gold light with his hand in hers and their daughters laughing behind the glass. She understood the one thing she would have staked her whole empire to be able to go back and tell herself on that rainy Monday morning. The measure of a person is never the moment you catch them at their worst. It is whether you had the courage to look again and the grace to see them true. She had looked again, and it had saved them all.